Matthew 22, beginning at the 36th verse. Teacher, which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses? Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. As it is customary here at Emmanuel, as you're taking your seats, help me introduce the title of today's message, Love Beyond the Walls. Love Beyond the Walls. Love Beyond the Walls. Many of you are aware that we are in a sermon series entitled Compassion's Reach. Minister Terry, my brother in ministry, kicked us off on first Sunday with a familiar story about the Good Samaritan. And then Minister Simeon was here last week as he shared, God's got what you need. I also understood that he gave you all instructions if you had any further questions regarding the burglar that ate the key lime pie. I'm here to set the record straight. The burglar that ate the key lime pie was Minister Simeon Shigg. But for our time today, love beyond the walls. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to love people who look like us, think like us, vote like us? How easy it is to love folks who worship like us, and I even dare say, Charlisa, agree with us. But what happens when Jesus calls us to love beyond our comfort? By the time we arrive at our text today, there are a few things that we need to keep in mind. I'm a person that believes context matters. So by the time we arrive at our text today, Jesus is no longer in Galilee. He's in Jerusalem during the final week before his crucifixion. The tension is growing. I mean, the tension is so thick, you can cut it with a knife. And the religious leaders or the religious elite have made up in their minds that this Jesus must be stopped. They were looking for ways to discredit him publicly. So they began asking Jesus a series of questions. Now you have to understand something, beloved. These questions were not because they were seeking the truth. They wanted to trap him. The first trap comes from the Pharisees. They asked Jesus, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? It wasn't an honest question. It was a political trap. You see, if Jesus said pay the taxes to Caesar, then the Jewish community would have assumed he had sided with the Roman government. But if he had said don't pay the taxes, then Jesus would have been viewed as a rebellion against the Roman government. In the eyes of the Pharisees, this was a lose-lose question for Jesus. But Jesus refused to be trapped. He simply said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar, and render unto God the things that are God's. Then came the second trap. This time, the Sadducees, who, by the way, did not believe in the resurrection. They approached Jesus with a hypothetical story about a woman who married 7 brothers under the law of levirate marriage. Levirate, the root word is levar. In Latin, that means brother-in-law. Y'all didn't figure that out yet? By now, she married 7 of her brother-in-laws. So the Sadducees asked, in the resurrection, whose wife will she be? Again, this was not an honest question. It was another attempt to embarrass Jesus publicly. But Jesus answered with such wisdom and such authority that Matthew tells us that he silenced the Sadducees. In other words, this was Jesus' mic drop moment. As our text opens today in verse 36, this time they sent an expert of the law. He was a lawyer, Reverend Jeff, a scholar, someone who knew the law of Moses inside and out, frontwards and backwards. And Matthew tells us that this expert of the law tested him with the question that opens up our text today. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Again, this was not a search for the truth. This was trap number 3. They wanted Jesus to choose one commandment over another, but Jesus refused to play their game. Instead, instead of choosing one commandment, he summed up the entire law by saying, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And then he followed up immediately and said, and a second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. They asked Jesus for the greatest commandment. They came looking for a debate, but Jesus gave them a discipleship lesson. They came asking him to rank the commandments. Instead, Jesus pointed them to relationships. And to my fellow ministers, as we are in our ministerial training, I would even dare to say that here's the theological tension in the text. It's possible to say that we love God while struggling to love the people God created. Because the same love that reaches up vertically struggles to extend that love horizontally. But Jesus will not let us separate our love from God from our love for our neighbors. Because the same love that reaches up towards God must reach out towards people. Church, when those two loves start working together, compassion can't stop at the church doors. It loves beyond the walls. And a love like this begins first with loving God. Everybody say, loving God. You see, before Jesus ever commands us to love our neighbor, he first commands us to love God with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our mind. And the reason why we can love God with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our mind, because 1 John chapter 4, verse 19 tells us that we love him because he first loved us. And that order matters. It matters because if we don't love God first, we will eventually love people based on convenience. We will eventually love people who are easy to love. If we don't love God first, we will love only those people who love us back. We'll only love people who agree with us. But Jesus says our love for others begins with our love for God. Compassion isn't simply being nice. I believe that compassion is the overflow of God's love inside us. And when we spend time with Christ, we really spend time with Christ in the Word, talking and having conversations with him. The old folks used to say that he walks with me and he talks with me and he tells me that I am his own. When you begin to walk with Christ, our hearts begin to look like his heart. When we spend time with Christ, our hearts should begin to be like his heart. Ezekiel 36 says it this way: a new heart will I give you, and a new spirit I will put within you. When we spend time with Christ, what should eventually happen is when what breaks his heart begins to break our heart. Who he loves, we begin to love. Being a Christ follower and more like him should make us more like him. Not simply more knowledgeable of the word, not more knowledgeable of religious practices, but more like Christ. Can I share something with you all that happened to me last month? So last month I was with one of my good girlfriends celebrating her 60th birthday. We were at a restaurant, nice restaurant, rooftop restaurant, having a good time. If I'm being honest, this was the second of birthday events of 2 this particular day. And as we were dancing and having a good time, all of a sudden, we hear the beat. The wobble drops. No one needed to send instructions. No one needed to send text message alerts. We all assumed the position and reported to the dance floor. But what happened, as we were doing the wobble, there were a group of Indian men and women who looked at us and they said, "Can we join? Will you teach us the dance?" Of course we will. So we taught them the dance. We laughed. We had a good time. And then when the wobble went off, we went back to our respective tables, etc. But then in a few moments, this other song dropped. The song was called Mundian Tabake. In English, that means beware of the boys. Unbeknownst to us, this was a very popular Indian song. We got a DJ in the room that is already nodding his head. Needless to say, we didn't know the song and or the dance moves. Oh, this group of Indian individuals, they looked at us and said, now it's our turn. So, of course, we said, "Hey, can you teach us the dance?" And so they said, yeah. And so we danced. We had a great time. And when the song went off, we went to our respective places. But as the evening drew to a close and we were heading out, my party was leaving, so we were leaving, I said, let me go over and say goodbye to these people that we shared a moment with. Then I mentioned it was 3 Indian women and 2 Indian men that didn't look like us. Their native language really was not ours. And when I went to say goodbye to them, each one of them asked me for a hug. It was in that moment that I thought, this is true humanity. You see, while we were out there dancing and being silly and having a good time, nobody asked where anyone was born. Nobody asked anyone's political affiliation. Nobody asked to see their immigration papers or what their immigration status was. Nobody asked what church they attended or what denomination they were a part of. We simply recognized each other as human beings having fun. And I left there that night. My heart was full because I thought, this is what happens when we allow God's lens and God's love to shape the way we treat people. You see, EBC, when we truly love God, something begins to happen in our hearts. His love changes us. This change cannot be contained. I believe love is the heartbeat of God, and compassion is the hands and feet of that love. And because God's love was never meant to stay in our hearts, that's why compassion can't stop at the door. It loves beyond the walls. And a love like this that loves beyond the walls first has to see people beyond labels. Somebody say, see people beyond labels. We have to see people beyond categories. Jesus simply says, love your neighbor as yourself. You notice something here? Jesus never said, love your neighbor based on geography or proximity. Jesus never defines our neighbor by race. He never defines our neighbor by socioeconomic class. He never defines our neighbor by nationality or place of origin. He simply says, love your neighbor. Say, love your neighbor. Look to your neighbor and say, love your neighbor. The great theologian Howard Thurman understood the radical nature of Jesus' command to love your neighbor as yourself. In his work, Jesus and the Disinherited, he wrote it this way: every man is potentially every other man's neighbor. Neighborliness is non-spatial, it's qualitative. A man must love his neighbor directly, clearly, and permitting no barriers between. What's Thurman saying here? Thurman is challenging us who have the tendency to limit who qualifies as our neighbor. You see, in Jesus' day, if someone were to ask, who's my neighbor, it wasn't really a true question. This was a question in hopes of narrowing the circle of individuals I was obligated to love. But Thurman turns this entire question on its ear. He turns it around. He's saying every person we encounter has the potential to become our neighbor simply because God places them in our path. In other words, neighbor is not determined by proximity, but by opportunity. And isn't that what Jesus is saying in our text today? Neighbor isn't simply the person next door. My neighbor is the person that God puts in front of me. Neighbor is every single person you encounter. Neighborliness is not determined by geography. Jesus is teaching us that before we see categories, before we see labels, we must see people. You know where the origin of that comes from, Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. It's a familiar passage because anytime someone tries to tell us what we are not, we go back to this verse and says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Before we see politics, before we see anything else, we must see people. Before we see differences, we must really see how much more we are alike. Before we see things that are opposite, we must really look at dignity. Before we see categories, we must see the image of God. Man was created in the image of God. So when we look at our fellow man, we are looking at the very image and essence of God. That's why we can't reduce people to labels, categories, and stereotypes. I'm sure you've heard some of these stereotypes. And I hope and pray none of these stereotypes were hurled at you. You've heard they're lazy. You've heard they're illegal. You've heard they're dangerous. Oh, they're welfare recipients. They're too rich to care. They're too poor to matter. That's just another addict. That's just another ex-con. Before we ever start reducing people to stereotypes, we must look at them as if they were the image of God. We can't reduce people to where they came from. We can't reduce people to the labels that society has placed on them. Because before they were anything else developed in our mind, these were people that were loved by God. These were people created in the image of God. And I do believe that's exactly what I experienced on that dance floor that night. For just a few moments, there were no barriers, only people having a good time. And I wonder what would happen if the church saw people the way Jesus sees people. I wonder what would happen if the church saw people like Jesus saw people. What would happen if our community experienced that kind of love? And if every person is potentially our neighbor, then there are no barriers that love cannot cross. Because compassion doesn't stop at the church doors. It loves beyond the walls. And a love like this that loves beyond the walls has to love beyond the sanctuary. A love like this has to love beyond the vestibule. A love like this has to love beyond the parking lot. If God has changed our hearts, and if he has changed our minds and the way we see people, then he changes the way we respond. Micah says, "Know, O people, the Lord has told you what is good, and this is what he requires of you, to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." Love isn't something that we admire like a fine piece of china that we put on our top curios or our top shelves, and that we look at it as if it was crystal or china or porcelain, and we only dust it off when company comes. Love is something that we practice. So what does love beyond the walls look like? Sometimes it just listens. Sometimes love beyond the wall serves. Sometimes it simply sits beside someone who's hurting. You do realize that sometimes the first sermon that people ever hear isn't from a pulpit. It's from the way they were treated by God's people. Compassion's reach includes love. Last background text on this, 1 John chapter 3:17 says it this way. If someone has enough money to live well and sees his brother or sister in need, but shows no compassion, how can God's love be in that person? Let's not merely say that we love each other. Let us show the truth by our actions. Compassion isn't something that we feel. Compassion is love in action. We don't simply want people to experience our kindness. We want them to experience the love of Christ. God never intended this type of love to be, and compassion to be left in the pews. He never intended for this type of love to remain inside the church and in the pews. So don't just come to church, be the church. Don't just sing about love, show love. Or as Sister D wrote, share love. Don't just pray for the community, go into the community. Leave here today asking, Lord, who needs your love and compassion through me this week? Leave here today asking God, who will you reveal to me that needs to see your compassion and love? Who will you set up a divine appointment so that they can experience the love and compassion? When you leave here this week, you should be asking, who can I show this love to? Love must become visible. It must become visible. And it can't stay in the sanctuary. Compassion doesn't stop at the church doors. It loves beyond the wall. And I know we're saying that we're going to love beyond the wall, and many of you may say, well, what does that look like? We don't really have to look far. We already have the blueprint. We have the blueprint. All we have to do is look at Jesus. All we have to do is look at Jesus. He is the architect of what love beyond the walls looks like. Because if you want to know what compassion's reach looks like, look at Jesus. If you want to know what love beyond the walls looks like, look at Jesus. You see, his love crossed every boundary. His compassion fixed every broken heart. His love welcomed the rejected, and his compassion touched the untouchable. His love loved the unlovable and forgave sinners, and his compassion restored the forgotten. At the cross, he carried the cross, but his compassion kept him on the cross. And when we start thinking about the cross, all of the work that was done at the cross, the redemptive value at the cross, how we were saved at the cross. Now I'm getting a little older, y'all niece. We're about to be 60. And now I understand what the old folks used to mean when they would always sing the great hymns of the church. They would sing songs about the cross, and I understand why they did that, because at the cross was just how far his love was willing to go. You remember those songs, at the cross, where I first saw the light and the burdens of my heart rolled away? It was at the cross that those redemptive things were done. It was at the cross where he found us. I used to love at our church in Ohio, they used to sing Near the Cross on Communion Sunday. I love to hear Near the Cross. Now I understand, Jesus, keep me near the cross. There is a precious fountain, free for all, a healing stream that flows from Calvary's mouth. It was at the cross. It was at the cross where his love met us. It was at the cross where his mercy found us. It was at the cross where his compassion reached us. And even while they were crucifying him, his love left that cross. The nails couldn't stop his love. The mocking couldn't stop his compassion. Death couldn't stop his mission. And the grave couldn't stop his victory. And my Bible tells me that even while they were hurting him and harming him, that he yelled a prayer from Calvary, Father, forgive them. That's compassion's reach. That's love beyond the walls. They rejected him, but he loved them. They mocked him. He loved them. They crucified him, and he still prayed for them. That's compassion's reach. That's love beyond the walls. And if he could love us through our mess, if he could love us every time we made him frown, if he can love him when we treat each other all kind of ways, if he can love us when we have stuff come out of our mouths and use those same voices to lift up holy praise, if we can use our hands to harm people and he can still love us, if he can love us on our worst day, if he can love us on our bad day, then surely we can love beyond the walls. Take this love into your neighborhoods. Take this love to your workplaces. Take this love to your jobs. Take this love to your schools. Because compassion doesn't stop at the church doors. It loves beyond the walls.